Welcome to Totally Awesome Films, and in this video we're going to talk about the 1967 film, You Only Live Twice. This is the movie that had James Bond posing as a Japanese fisherman. The movie where Americans learned that
in Japan, men always come first, women come second.
Where James Bond and an army of ninjas assault a Spectre base inside an active volcano. The movie that introduces a villain so memorable and so iconic that parodying him has become a genre unto itself, the prototype for Austin Powers' Dr. Evil. And the movie that finally broke Sean Connery and almost broke the entire James Bond franchise and left Eon Productions in desperate search for a new James Bond. It's a fun, thrilling adventure that has our hero going off to exotic locales, with thrilling action sequences, incredible gadgets like the Safecracker and Little Nelly, beautiful women like Aki and Kissy Suzuki, memorable allies in Tiger Tanaka, a terrifying and menacing villain in Donald Pleasance's Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Today, we're going to be discussing the fifth James Bond film, You Only Live Twice. Now, last time we took a slight diversion and discussed the non-canon 1967 Casino Royale. And in 1967, we have a return to the Eon-produced canon film, You Only Live Twice. Now, Sean Connery returns as James Bond for his pseudo-final film, and he actually quit at the end of this, but he would return 2 movies later in Diamonds Are Forever. This movie was based on a 1964 novel by Ian Fleming, You Only Live Twice, which was his 11th Bond book. Fleming got the idea to set the book in Japan after he visited Japan in 1959 for his non-fiction novel, Thrilling Cities. He visited Japan again in 1962 and stayed for 12 days just touring and appreciating Japan's beauty and culture. In the novels, this book was written after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and while much of the plot of the movie is similar to the book, in the book he's hunting Blofeld and Irma Bunt for murdering his wife, Tracy Bond. The events are reversed in the movies because You Only Live Twice was made first, and the movie On Her Majesty's Secret Service would come next. Now, the 3 books, Thunderball, which was his 9th book, was where he introduced Blofeld and the organization of Spectre. The middle book, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the 10th book, is where Blofeld and Irma Bunt tries to kill Bond but murders his wife Tracy. And it's the 3rd book, You Only Live Twice, his 11th novel, where James Bond hunts Blofeld to avenge the death of his wife. These 3 books are collectively known as the Blofeld Trilogy. And these 3 books are the only Ian Fleming novels where Spectre and Blofeld appear. And this may seem odd to movie fans who haven't read the book because Spectre and Blofeld have been the villains ever since the start. Now also, this novel was written after James Bond had already been fully established in the movie franchise, with James Bond being played by Sean Connery. Therefore, Ian Fleming wrote James Bond to resemble Sean Connery's portrayal of Bond and made him more relaxed and laid back. However, the overall tone of the novel itself is very dark and pessimistic. And this is likely because Ian Fleming had just had a heart attack during the time of the trial where Kevin McClory sued him for Thunderball, and his doctors told him he had only a few years to live. Therefore, Ian Fleming was facing his own mortality and was in a very dark and pessimistic mood while writing this book. In fact, he released the novel You Only Live Twice in March of 1964 and then died of a heart attack in August, only 5 months after the book was published. He had also just written the short stories Octopussy and the Living Daylights right before his death. After the production of the 4th movie, Thunderball, it was decided that the next film would be On Her Majesty's Secret Service, followed by You Only Live Twice, and this would completely follow the order of the books. Thunderball, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and then You Only Live Twice. However, Eon realized that On Her Majesty's Secret Service had a lot of skiing scenes and it would take too long to scout all the snowy locations in Switzerland. Therefore, they decided to make You Only Live Twice first and then On Her Majesty's Secret Service next, and begin location scouting early for that film. So by the time You Only Live Twice entered pre-production, Ian Fleming had already passed away. In fact, he died just before Goldfinger hit the theaters. Normally, they'd go to Richard Maybaum, who'd written every other screenplay for the James Bond movies. He wrote Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger, and Thunderball. However, Richard Maybaum was busy working on another screenplay and was unavailable for the first time. So the Eon producers were stuck. They initially hired Harold Jack Bloom, who was an American screenwriter who had worked on shows like Bonanza and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. However, he soon left the project. Broccoli and Saltzman then looked at Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl was already famous as the writer of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, as well as James and the Giant Peach. But he was also known for writing these very clever and witty short stories that Cubby Broccoli was a big fan of. And bonus, Roald Dahl had been friends with Ian Fleming before his death. If you remember, Ian Fleming wrote another book called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and therefore the two of them were friends on the children's writer's circuit. And therefore, the producers went to Roald Dahl, and Dahl was more than happy to help out Ian Fleming's franchise, writing the next screenplay. Now, Roald Dahl believed that You Only Live Twice was Fleming's worst book, feeling that it read more like a travelogue of Japan than a real James Bond adventure. And therefore, he had to completely revamp the story. In the book, Blofeld hangs out in an old Japanese castle and spends his days dressed in samurai armor. Now, this idea would go on to inspire the ending of the recent James Bond movie, No Time to Die. And this divergence from the book will start a trend where the movies begin to look more and more different from the novels, and later where they would only share the title. After writing the screenplay for You Only Live Twice, Roald Dahl went on to write The Fantastic Mr. Fox and Matilda. For director, Ian approached Lewis Gilbert after Cubby Broccoli had just seen a movie called Alfie, starring Michael Caine, directed by Gilbert, and was very impressed by the movie. Gilbert initially turned it down because he didn't think he was up to directing such a big film. Up to that point, Lewis Gilbert had directed a bunch of small war movies, and a year prior had just directed the comedy Alfie, which was a huge success. Ultimately, Broccoli and Saltzman were able to convince him to do it by reminding him that this would be a chance to have his movie seen by the biggest audience in the world, and Gilbert just couldn't resist. After directing You Only Live Twice, he would go on to direct The Spy Who Loved Me, as well as Moonraker. For the role of the Japanese top spy, Tiger Tanaka, Broccoli and Saltzman originally wanted cinema great Toshiro Mifune. However, Mifune had already committed to the American movie Grand Prix. Lewis Gilbert had worked with Japanese actor Tetsuro Tamba and hired him as Tiger Tanaka. Tetsuro Tanaka spoke English very well, but they wanted a tougher sounding voice, and so for his voice, he was dubbed by Robert Rady, who had previously dubbed Emilia Largo's voice in Thunderball, and that gave him that menacing voice.
Do you like Japanese sake, Mr. Bond? Or would you prefer vodka martini?
Oh, no.
The film required two beautiful women, and filming in Japan, they had to hire two Japanese women. However, during auditions, none of the Japanese women could speak any English. They hired Akiko Wakayabashi and Miyahama because they showed the most potential to be able to learn English. And these two Japanese actresses were already famous and were contracted by Toho. They were regular staples of the Toho Godzilla monster movies. And in fact, the two actresses even appeared together in the classic 1962 monster film King Kong vs. Godzilla, which was the third Godzilla movie in the history of the franchise. Incidentally, they also starred together in the Japanese spy spoof movie Key of Keys, which was comically redubbed by Woody Allen in 1966 and released in the US as What's Up, Tiger Lily. Now, the two were brought to England for a few months to take English classes and to be fully immersed in the English culture to speed up their acquisition of English, like foreign exchange students. Now, in an interesting bit of trivia, actually, Akiko Wakayabashi was originally cast to play the final Bond girl Kissy Suzuki, and Miyahama was originally cast to play the first Bond ally, Suki. Well, Akiko Wakayabashi picked up English very well and very fast.
My job is to help you.
Like you helped Henderson.
I'm taking you to a place of safety.
However, there was a problem with Miyahama. Miyahama just could not learn English. She couldn't even learn it well enough for someone to dub her. Her English was so bad that the crew realized they had to fire her. The director, Lewis Gilbert, asked Tiger Tanaka actor Tetsuro Tamba to take her to dinner and deliver the bad news that she was being fired and that she'd be flown back to Japan. Well, the next morning, the producers asked Tamba how Miyahama took the news, and his face was white as if he'd seen a ghost, and he said that she told her that if they fired her, she would commit suicide by jumping off the Dorchester building that night. Tamba felt that this was not a blank threat, and she was genuinely worried for her life. The director also worried, and they decided not to fire her, but instead they switched roles. Akiko Wakayabashi, whose English was getting good, was giving the meteor part of Suki. But Akiko asked if the part could be renamed Aki after her, and the producers obliged, and so the character of Suki became Aki. Miyahama was given the smaller role of the final Bond girl, Kissy Suzuki, which has very little speaking lines. But she does have more action scenes, and so it all worked out in the end. This film was filmed live in Japan. The film franchise had become known for going to these exotic locales like the Bahamas and Jamaica and taking it somewhere really exotic, especially for the time, going to Japan, and it really works well here. It opens up the franchise, and now the franchise feels larger and more international. Because if you consider this is the 1960s, when only less than 20 years ago, most of mainstream Americans thought of Japan as the country they fought in World War II. Many Americans didn't really think of Japan as kind of how we think of Japan now, a major U.S. ally and the top tourist attraction spot as well as economic powerhouse. This was a time for audiences to really witness Japan for the first time. You sense that the audience is being treated to a tour of Tokyo and Kobe and the Japanese countryside. Broccoli, Saltzman, Ken Adams, and Lewis Gilbert went location scouting to look for Blofeld's base, a Japanese castle next to the ocean, just like in Ian Fleming's book. However, they couldn't find such a castle, and they spent weeks looking for one. Then one day, they saw a huge volcano, and Cubby Broccoli had an aha moment. He saw his Spectre Base. Broccoli knew that this volcano was going to be the massive Spectre lair and would be the centerpiece of the movie. And of course, it was up to Ken Adam to build it. Ken Adam began to draw a series of sketches regarding this massive underground lair. Ken Adam designed the massive complex. He showed the sketches to Cubby Broccoli, who asked how much it would cost to build it. And Ken Adam told him some outrageously high number and said, "It'll probably cost $1 million. And Broccoli said, "If you can build it, you got your $1 million. And now with his design approved, he had to find a way to build it. Right at the end of pre-production of this film, as they were getting ready to fly to Japan, Sean Connery dropped a bomb that would send shockwaves through Eon Productions. He told the producers that this was his last James Bond movie, and he was quitting the role. And Broccoli and Saltzman couldn't believe it, and they begged him to reconsider. However, Connery had made up his mind, and he'd grown tired of the role and was tired of all the invasions of privacy by the fans. Furthermore, he was having difficulty with contract negotiations with Broccoli and Saltzman, who he felt was not paying him enough for the role. He felt that he had created this big franchise, turning both Broccoli and Saltzman into multi-millionaires, while he was being paid very little money for the role. He said that he would return for the price of $1 million, which, if you think about it, was pretty reasonable, and they would eventually pay him that for Diamonds Are Forever. But at this point, they declined, and Sean Connery decided that he had had enough and decided to quit. The relationship between Sean Connery and Eon had deteriorated to the point where Connery refused to act if Saltzman and Broccoli were on the set. However, there may have been a little room to convince him to stay on for one more movie, but that obliterated when they all arrived in Japan. When Sean Connery arrived in Japan, James Bond was already a huge phenomenon, and Connery was really hounded by intrusive Japanese fans and reporters. He thought Western fans were bad, the Japanese were worse.
Now, he's here and he has not been given the privilege and respect of Japan for a certain amount of privacy.
Connery was really distressed by how much the Japanese paparazzi hounded him. They broke into his hotel room and would not let him eat alone nor sleep. So the producers hired 30 Japanese security guards to prevent the paparazzi and the fans from harassing Sean Connery, as well as guard the set, preventing fans from breaking in and taking props and souvenirs. Unfortunately, even the guards began to take photographs and harassing Sean Connery, and the final straw was that one of them took a photograph of Sean Connery while he was sitting on the toilet going to the bathroom, and the photograph was published in a Japanese newspaper. Understandably, you can see why Sean Connery was upset, and it solidified his decision to quit the role of James Bond. The movie starts in space, and we see an American NASA spacecraft called Jupiter 16. Suddenly, a huge spaceship suddenly appears from nowhere and swallows up Jupiter 16. The Americans blame the Russians, while the Russians adamantly deny involvement, and the two almost go to war. The British government acts as mediator and calmly tells them that they suspect a third party and that they already have a man in Hong Kong working on the case. We then go to Hong Kong, where James Bond is in bed with Ling, but it appears to be a double cross. The bed traps him, and a bunch of men rush in with machine guns and assassinate him. And it's an interesting way to start the movie. Now, Ling is played by Tsai Chin, who is a very prominent Chinese-American character actress who's been in hundreds of small roles, but is probably best known for her portrayal of Auntie Lindo in The Joy Luck Club, the mother of Waverly, played by Tamlyn Tomita, the chess prodigy. And in 2006, She had a cameo as one of the Texas Hold'em card players in Casino Royale, who plays against James Bond and Le Chiffre. We then get the theme song, You Only Live Twice, performed by Nancy Sinatra. And this is one of the more successful and memorable Bond themes. It's an earworm that easily gets stuck in your brain once you hear it. So Bond is dead, and they have a burial at sea. But then his body is picked up by a submarine, and it's M's office inside the submarine, and it even has Moneypenny's desk. We learn that it was MI6's plan to fake Bond's death so they can investigate the missing American spaceship in relative anonymity.
Late as usual, even from your own funeral.
Well, we corpses have absolutely no sense of time.
In you go, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
And M sends Bond to Japan, where the giant spaceship had landed. Bond arrives in Japan, and we get some amazing shots of the country. And one of the places he visits is a sumo tournament. And this is an amazing sequence even today. Can you imagine how mind-blowing it must have been for audiences in 1967? And apparently this was filmed at a real sumo tournament, and there was no acting among the sumo wrestlers. The sumo wrestling, the reaction of the audiences, the cheers, it was all authentic. At the sumo tournament, Bond is approached by a beautiful female Japanese secret agent named Aki, and to ensure that they are each other's spy contacts, Bond has to profess his love for her.
I love you.
Aki takes him to meet local MI6 operative Diko Henderson, who lives in Japan. And Henderson is played by Charles Gray, who is great here. And I say he's great here because Charles Gray will go on to play Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever, and he is less great in that film. Henderson claims to have critical information about the spacecraft that it was neither the Russians nor the Americans, but rather, and as he's telling Bond, he suddenly goes silent. A hitman has cut him from behind with an assassin's sword, and Bond chases the killer and kills him, taking his clothes as a disguise, and is driven in the getaway car to Osato Chemicals. And at Osato's office, Bond and the driver have a brutal fight. This fight scene is amazing, and this scene was actually filmed on set in England, and most of the fight was done by Bond's stunt double Bob Simmons fighting the driver, who was played by famed professional wrestler Peter Maivia, aka the Flying Hawaiian, who incidentally is the grandfather of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. After killing the driver, Bond takes a moment to steal some liquor from Osato's office and notices a safe. And we see one of his cool gadgets, a high-tech safecracker. So after obtaining the secret documents, Bond is pursued by security and then is rescued by Aki, who then acts shady and flees into a secluded subway station. Bond follows her, but then falls through a trap door leading to a hidden office of the head of Japanese Secret Service, Tiger Tanaka, whose office is in a subway train. What's with these head of Secret Service? Tiger Tanaka's office is hidden in a subway train. M's is hidden in a submarine.
My name is Tanaka. Please call me Tiger.
If you're Tanaka, how do you feel about me?
I love you.
The next day, Bond, masquerading as a potential buyer, returns to Osato Chemicals and meets with Osato, who orders his secretary, Helga Brandt, to kill Bond. And Helga Brandt was played by Karen Dorr and is an obvious callback to Fiona Volpe. Once outside, the assassins open fire on Bond before Aki rescues him, and this leads to a car chase where the Japanese assassins are in hot pursuit of Bond and Aki. And apparently Lewis Gilbert and the producers couldn't think of a clever way to end this car chase, but it was Cubby Broccoli's wife who suggested on a whim, why not have a giant magnet pick up the assassins? And it seemed ridiculous at first, but after they thought about it, it was perhaps a good kind of ridiculous. And so that's how they finished the car scene. Aki phones in for help and calls in for a helicopter with a giant magnet, which picks up the assassins and dumps them into the ocean. And it actually works for the scene. It's really great for the tone of this movie. They drive to Kobe, where a ship called the Ningpo is docked, and Bond calls in for Little Nelly. And we wonder who Little Nelly might be.
Yeah? Contact M. Tell him to send Little Nelly. Repeat, Little Nelly.
And they learn that the ship is delivering elements for rocket fuel, which leads to an amazing rooftop action sequence where Bond evades a gang of Spectre goons, and this leads to an amazing rooftop action sequence. This is one of my favorite action sequences of all time because it's so different from every action sequence we've seen, and Lewis Gilbert intentionally wanted to film this sequence to look very new and very different. And I think Lewis Gilbert did a fantastic job here. even 40 years later, it still holds up as very innovative. The moment where the camera pans up, it's one long shot as the camera moves up and you see Bond fighting off dozens of goons ready to attack him. And he escapes the goons by falling onto a row of boxes. And just when he thinks he's gotten away, he's knocked out from behind. Bond is captured and awakens in Brandt's office, where Helga Brandt interrogates him before seducing him. And the two fly to Tokyo, but en route, she sets off a flare inside the plane and seals Bond in a seat with a 2x4 and then bails out in a parachute. Now, I don't know why she didn't just shoot him, but then it wouldn't become a cliche that Dr. Evil's son Scott Evil would call out in Austin Powers. Bond karate chops the 2x4 that was restraining him and then lands the plane and runs out to safety just before the plane explodes. We then learn who or what Little Nelly is. It's a small, portable, but very powerful auto-gyro helicopter built by Q. He flies over the area armed with Little Nelly. And Bond is attacked by 4 helicopters, and he and Little Nelly destroy all 4 of them. Now, this scene was filmed practically, and Little Nelly actually exists in real life. It is the Wallace WA-116 Agile, developed by the Royal Air Force in the early 1960s. And the stunt pilots filming this action sequence said it was very dangerous and nerve-wracking to shoot this sequence. And sure enough, someone really did get injured. Aerial cameraman John Jordan was in a helicopter filming a scene where one helicopter flies over another, and this created a major downdraft where the rotors of the helicopter underneath went through the floor of the helicopter flying on top that John Jordan was flying in. The rotors went through the roof of the helicopter and through John Jordan's foot, completely severing it. Fortunately, both helicopters were able to land and no one was killed. Jordan was rushed to the nearest major hospital in Japan where his foot was reattached, and he was flown back to London. However, after several months of rehab and recovery, he was still in extreme pain, and John Jordan finally made the difficult decision to amputate the foot. Apparently, the surgical attachment had been flawed and his body was rejecting it. Within a few days of amputating his foot, using a foot prosthetic, he was up and walking again and soon filming sequences. And in fact, John Jordan actually filmed the gorgeous aerial snow scene in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. However, a year after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, while filming the 1970s film Catch-22, John Jordan, who was infamous for refusing to wear a safety harness, leaned out of a film to give another cameraman a hand signal, but he lost his grip on the plane and fell 4,000 feet to his death. And the world lost an amazing aerial cameraman. Back to this movie, a Soviet spacecraft is next captured in orbit by another mysterious, unidentified spacecraft, and this heightens tensions between Russia and the United States. And this mysterious spaceship lands in a hidden base inside a volcano operated by Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Blofeld summons Osato and Brandt to his quarters for not having killed Bond. Osato blames Brandt and Blofeld drops her in a pool filled with piranhas. In Kyoto, Bond prepares to conduct a closer investigation of the island and trains with Tanaka's ninjas and then dons a Japanese disguise. And this will include a staged marriage with a local Japanese pearl diver who is really a Japanese secret agent. And boy, Sean Connery really nails it as a Japanese fisherman, right? No, he doesn't. While in Kyoto, Aki is killed when she's poisoned in her sleep by a Spectre agent who is really trying to kill Bond. And this technique of using a long thread and dripping poison down the thread will be homaged years later by John Cusack's character in Grosse Point Blank. Bond is introduced to Tanaka's student, Kissy Suzuki, who'll perform the role of his wife. And acting on a lead, the pair reconnoiter a cave booby-trapped with phosgene gas, which leads to the volcano with a secret base. And this is the amazing Spectre Base inside the volcano that Kim Adam built for $1 million, which incidentally was more than the entire budget of Dr. No. And it was built on set in London, and it had a rotating helipad, it had a roof that actually opened up, and even had an operating monorail system. And it was a massive undertaking. And apparently Ken Adam used more steel to build the set than steel used to build the Hilton Hotel in London. Ken Adam said that at that time he had to have been crazy for him to even think he could build such a set. Now during the filming of the scene where Kissy Suzuki and Bond investigate the volcano, the stunt woman who was to do the swimming scenes for Miyahama was not present. And Sean Connery's wife at the time, Dion Cilento, was a very proficient swimmer and saved the day and offered to stand in and double for about 5 of the Japanese women in their swimming scenes. And it was her, Sean Connery's wife, that is swimming as Kissy Suzuki in all of those swimming scenes. Bond slips inside the volcano lair, while Kissy Suzuki goes to alert Tanaka. And apparently, swimming completely washes off the Japanese makeup. Well, Bond locates and frees the captured American and Soviet astronauts, and with their help, steals a spacesuit to infiltrate the Spectre spacecraft. However, Blofeld spots Bond, and he's detained, and Bond is taken to the control room, where he meets Blofeld for the first time. Now, for the role of Ernst Stavro Blofeld, Harry Saltzman cast Czech actor Jan Werich. And when Jan Werich landed in Japan and met Cubby Broccoli and Lewis Gilbert, they were not happy with Harry Saltzman's choice. Jan Werich was a gentle and kind-looking man that didn't fit the image of Blofeld, the sinister leader of Spectre. Cubby Broccoli noted they'd look too much like Father Christmas, and they weren't sure if they needed to recast him or not. And the more they worked with him, they realized they needed a change. And after 9 days, they finally fired him and immediately replaced him with Donald Pleasance. Now, Donald Pleasance was a prolific British actor who was probably best known as the forger who goes blind in the 1962 Great Escape. And many of the actors said that one day there was one actor playing Blofeld, and the next day they turn around and there's a totally different actor playing him. Now, his role here as Blofeld will probably go on to be his best known role. And I love his take on Blofeld. He gives a great balance between creepy and intimidating, but also intelligent and powerful. And you instantly believe that he controls this entire Spectre organization. Donald Pleasance's Ernst Stavro Blofeld, with his bald hair, huge facial scar, his white cat, and his gray Nehru jacket, has become an iconic James Bond image. He's been parodied numerous times, but the most famous is Dr. Evil in the Austin Power movies. And for our generation, Donald Pleasance is best known for his role here, but also as Dr. Samuel Loomis in the Halloween franchise, and as the US President in Escape from New York. Donald Pleasance had an idea that the character of Blofeld should have a deformity, something that made him stand out. And they suggested something like a limp or a beard or a lame hand, something identifiable to be remembered. And they eventually settled on a huge scar on his face. And that is one of the more memorable things about Blofeld, that very disturbing scar. Now, unfortunately, you gotta be careful what you ask for, because apparently that prosthetic makeup for the scar was extremely uncomfortable. And Donald Pleasance was in a lot of discomfort on set because of that makeup used to create that scar. Bond distracts Blofeld and lets in a squadron of ninjas, and this action sequence is spectacular and required over 100 stuntmen to film this sequence. During the scene where the ninjas descend from the mouth of the volcano into the base, Gilbert wanted them to descend really fast into the base. However, this would have been impossible to do with rope because it would burn the stuntman's hands as they're descending. Therefore, they created a very clever way to do this. The stuntmen descended on long rubber hoses. That way, the stuntman could slide down very fast. In fact, one of the stuntmen descended so fast that when he landed, he broke both his ankles. Blofeld kills Osato for his failure to eliminate Bond and prepares to kill Bond himself, but is stopped by Tiger Tanaka. Bond fights his way to the control room, kills Blofeld's bodyguard Hans, and activates the self-destruct sequence before it reaches the American capsule. Blofeld activates the base's self-destruct system, and he's able to escape to continue to be a thorn in James Bond's side in the next movie, On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Diamonds Are Forever. Bond, Kissy Suzuki, and Tiger Tanaka, and the surviving ninjas leave before the eruption destroys the base, and are picked up by the Japanese Maritime Forces and the British Secret Service. Once again, James Bond has saved the world. Now, this movie was made for a little over $10 million, that's $100 million when adjusted for inflation, and it went on to make $110 million internationally. So You Only Live Twice was a billion-dollar movie when you adjust it for inflation. And it was an undeniable success. But Sean Connery was gone. So what would become of the James Bond franchise? Well, in the next film, we're going to talk about what is perhaps the most controversial James Bond movie in the history of the franchise, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where Sean Connery leaves the role and leaves it in the hands of George Lazenby. And this film is very controversial and completely divides the fans, with half the fans absolutely loving the film, saying it's one of their favorite, while the other half absolutely hate it. Everyone has a strong opinion on the film, regardless of which side of the fence you fall under. And no doubt your opinion is just as strong. I'd really be interested in finding out which way you stand on Your Majesty's Secret Service. So let's return back next week for a discussion of that movie. So that ends my exploration into You Only Live Twice. What did you think of You Only Live Twice? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, I have other videos on my channel. Check out my video on Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, and even the 1967 Casino Royale. Well, that ends this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great time.